The alkaline diet has maybe been somewhat of a controversial topic. So what I'm going to try and do is talk about some myths and some facts about an alkaline diet, the alkaline diet, whatever you want to call it, by going through some claims that some people have made on the internet. So I've been watching various bits and pieces, pulling out some claims, and then I'm going to try and put some science together, maybe some context and things like that together to be able to understand what all this alkaline diet thing is supposed to mean. The first couple of claims that I'm going to be talking about is it's not going to change pH, so an acid or alkaline diet is not a true thing. So that was something. So what I've basically done is I've watched a few YouTube videos about people talking about and diminishing what an alkaline diet is and does and things like that, and pulled out some of the things that they're saying about it, and then looking for maybe some counter information to help balance the conversation, because I have no interests in the alkaline diet. I have no products to sell on it. I'm just interested in building a more balanced view on certain topics. So that's the first claim. And then the second claim is outside of optimal pH, we begin to die. So these are two claims that have been made, and what we're going to talk about and hopefully bring a little bit of context to is what they are about, what some of the science is saying regarding the alkaline diet. So this one here, in some respects, is a true statement. But what we have to understand is what the alkaline diet is trying to say, because what so much is being said is taking information out of context, because a certain person wants to sell a certain product, or they have a certain bias with information, then anything else doesn't fit that, then it must be wrong. So it's not going to change your pH, so an alkaline diet is not a true thing. Well, what we have to understand is that the pH of the blood does sit within an optimal range, and this is how, again, we have to sort of understand it. 7.35, 7.45. So if we go outside of this optimal range, we begin to die. So if we go outside, so if we're at like 7.1, then it's going to be a very big problem for the body. But what they're saying is that anywhere in here, then we are healthy, and our body always keeps us in there. And in some respects, there is some truth to that. And what the alkaline diet isn't going to do is it's not going to change this optimal range. That is, again, sort of a true part of the statement. But what's not true is, although it's only a very small range, but as we're going to find out, this small range has effects to it, both positive and negative. And it has a range, so 7.35 to 7.45. So there is a 0.1 range here, or a 0.10 range, if you want to put it like that, within this. Now, as we're going to find here, it is reported that there may be minimal changes in the value of plasma bicarbonate and blood pH within the range considered normal. So what most people are saying is that the alkaline diet won't change this optimal range. That's true. But what they're not saying is that changes within the optimal range will cause us problems. What they're saying is that anywhere in here is fine, and it's not going to change, and therefore we're always fine. But what's starting to be understood is that even small changes within this optimal range is that there are problems that are starting to come from that, and the more science you read, the more you'll understand that. Again, this is just about building some degree of context. It's not going to answer all your questions, so if you do have questions, comments, stick them in the comments below. Try not to be too ranty. Actually ask a genuine question. I'll give it a genuine answer. If you're just going to rant and rave about how wrong I am, then I'll either leave it or I'll put a sarcastic comment alluding to that fact. But again, if it's a genuine comment, or a genuine question, I'll answer it genuinely. This condition, when the pH is balanced at values close to the lower limit, 7.35, is called low-grade metabolic acidosis. So even when we're down here and we're not maintaining this sort of optimal middle or sort of to the higher end, which again, you'll probably get a low grade chronic metabolic alkalosis if we're up here. But what we generally find is that down here is going to be a problem, and it's now starting to become called a thing, if you will. It's starting to have a label. So there are some factors that can lead to low-grade metabolic acidosis. Diet is one of the main factors that influence the occurrence of this condition. So the diet-induced low-grade metabolic acidosis is starting to become a thing, and it's starting to become understood. As you dig deeper into sort of acid-base physiology or acid-alkali physiology, renal physiology, which regulates acid, or is a part of regulating acid and bases, then you start to see that it does fluctuate and that there is a normal range, but at the bottom end of this normal range, it's starting to be understood that this low-grade metabolic acidosis, there are some problems with it, and one of the factors that are contributing to it is diet. So where a lot of this acid alkali diet type thing is starting to come about, and people are starting to counter it and talk about it as if it's not a thing, it's starting to become a thing. So we need to start taking it a little bit more seriously. To set us up for this slide, we've already talked about 7.45. You're going to see this again. We've talked about 7.35. We understand that values that are sort of towards the bottom end, and I'll keep rehashing this, is known as low-grade metabolic acidosis. So if we start from there, this is our optimal range. If we go outside of here, as we've said, death becomes more likely. But even within here, we can start to get complications within this optimal range. So diet-induced low-grade metabolic acidosis has only very small decreases in blood pH and plasma bicarbonate within the range considered to be normal. So again, we're talking about here, and we're talking about the problems that can happen within it. Within that range, this means that the system equilibrates nearer the lower end of normal rather than the higher end of normal. So it's talking about the body is constantly at this lower end, and it's equilibrating nearer that lower end. But if the duration of the acidosis, so being down here, of the acidosis, what I should also say is acidemia is a different thing. So again, you have to understand the different terms that are within. Acidosis is different to acidemia. But if the duration of acidosis is prolonged or chronic, or chronically present, even a low degree of acidosis becomes significant. So again, it's talking about this low grade that's always at this lower end can cause complications. This less severe but chronic low-grade acidosis is thought to be brought about primarily by two factors. Advancing age is one of them. So basically the slowing down of the metabolism, the slowing down of organs, the ability of organs to work. With the consequent decline in renal function, the kidneys. And the second one being diet, which promote the acidosis by both its net load as well as its sodium chloride content. The available research makes a compelling case that diet-induced acidosis is a real phenomenon. So when we talk about the claim before, which said it's not a real thing, we're starting to understand that it is a phenomenon. It has significant clinical relevance and may largely be prevented through dietary changes and should be recognised and treated. So what we're starting to understand is that there can be positive understandings that can come from an alkaline diet if you understand it properly. If you just take it out of context and you've got a bias that you're trying to protect, then I can see where the problems come. But we have to be able to get it in the right context when we're talking about information, which we'll look at in the next slide. On this next slide, again, I've got a couple more claims. And one is that, as we've sort of discussed, it does, but food you eat doesn't determine your pH. If I go back to this optimal range, 7.45, 7.35, it doesn't influence these ranges. Again, that's true. But within that, it does influence. And as we found out, that when we get to these lower values towards the 7.35, we get what's called a lower grade metabolic acidosis, which then leads on to pH factor of foods does not make foods healthy, it's nutrients. Now, this part is true. Your body does need nutrients, and they are valuable and should be taken into consideration. But what's also starting to become apparent is that the pH of foods is starting to have an influence on how your body is affected. Because, again, as you read about how nutrients are processed through metabolism, the pH affects that. So it underlies what the nutrients are doing. So if your pH isn't, let's just say, the optimum of the optimum, then it's not going to process foods as effectively, therefore not going to use nutrients as effectively. So we need to take into consideration the pH factor of certain foods, and then to be able to use that more effectively so then our body can process the nutrients that it needs. So what we then come on to is some science. So bacteria in the GI tract produce a variety of organic acids. So what we're starting to talk about now is not the foods necessarily that are producing the acids, but the enzymes and the microbiome, as it's processing the foods, releases acids, these organic acids. Each is metabolized to neutral end products. So there is usually no net H plus load. Now an H plus is a hydrogen ion, which is an acid. So what normally happens is these hydrogen ions that are produced as part of the organic acids, these hydrogen plus build up or can build up, but they get neutralized. So basically they they balance each other out. So there's no net load of acidity. Should their rise dramatically or their metabolism be slower than usual, H plus will accumulate. So what normally should happen in a healthy body is these H pluses that are in some respects produced in the GI tract are normally sorted out. But if we get into unhealthy environments, then generally they will start to accumulate. Again, there's a lot of grey areas and a lot of further discussion and a lot of further research to be done here. But what is starting to be understood is that there are starting to be problems understood that could come of it. So it's not just a case of dismissing the science or dismissing the notion of an alkaline diet. You kind of got to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further. So what might permit the GI tract to overproduce organic acids? So, normal digestive process with largely neutral foodstuffs. So that's what we have to understand, is that when we talk about this, we're talking about neutral foodstuff. If they are not neutral foodstuffs, then it's going to be more of a problem. So the normal digestive process, under the assumption that we're eating neutral foodstuff, does not pose a net acid load. So that's the first bit of context, is it's neutral foodstuff. So if you just say it doesn't happen, diet isn't a thing that affects pH, if you're talking about neutral foodstuffs, then okay, there's some truth in that. But if it's not, then we need to start investigating, go into nuance and new context. However, changes in the normal bacterial content of the intestines can potentiate the release of an unusual amount of organic acids into the body. The production of organic acids might be limited if these bacteria lack carbohydrate fuel. So when they talk about carbohydrate fuel, I'm just going to throw an assumption in there of my own and say they're talking more about sugar. Because when you eat high fiber foods, that's known as a prebiotic, which is actually helping the microbiome and the enzymes and the good bacteria in the gut to feed and keep balanced. But when they've got a carbohydrate fuel, which I'm assuming that they mean sugar fuel, that's when it gets out of balance. That's when we start getting overproduction of these organic acids, and that's what isn't a neutral food stuff. So that, again, has to be taken into consideration.